So in our previous lessons, we talked about the major and minor scale formulas that helped us identify what notes belong to that specific scale. So if you're writing a song in the key of C or C major, then you would know by using the major scale formula that notes in the C major scale are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back to C again. And then we also talked about the major and minor chord formula, the 1, 3, and 5. So you identify the first note of that scale, the third note of that scale, and the fifth note of that scale, and then you put them together and play simultaneously, and you have your chord, the major and the minor. So now what we're going to talk about are chord progressions. And we're going to start by discovering the chord patterns. And a chord progression is essentially when you're transitioning from one chord to another chord to make a musical phrase. So let's dive right in. Now, as we see here in the C major scale, every note in the scale is also represented with a number. Because we're in the C major scale, C is the first note of that scale. So it's the root note. And D would be the second note, and E the third, and F the fourth, and so on. So the same rules apply when it comes to the chords for that scale. So we're going to stay in C major. So here is the chord pattern for this C major scale. It's major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Say what? Let me just kind of go over that again. Basically what we're doing is the first major chord that you're going to play is a C major chord because that's the one in a C major scale. So I think it kind of helps when you see it done like this. We're going to play a pattern. And so what I'm going to do is, let's just say this chord pattern is going to be a 1, a 3, a 4, and then a 5. So what I'm basically doing is I'm playing the C major chord because it's the 1. Then I'm going to go ahead and go to the third of that scale, the E, but I'm going to play an E minor chord. And then I'll head over to the fourth note in the C major scale, and that's the F major chord. And then we'll go ahead and tie it all up with playing the fifth of that scale, which is a G, and that's going to be a G major chord. If this still feels a little weird, let me go ahead and practically apply this using a plugin that can help map this out visually. So here we're using a plugin called Captain Chords. I think this will be really useful for us to kind of see how this is going to work out. So let's go ahead over here and determine what's key that we're going to be playing in. So we'll just put C and then major. That's the scale that we're in. So as you can see, the first chord, or when I play 1, it's a C major. So just think of it as we're only highlighting now the numbers. So when it comes to chord patterns, you're mostly focusing on the chord Roman numeral or the pattern. So you're going to do a 1, 4, 5. So I've just basically played the C major chord, which is the 1, and I went to the F major, which is the fourth in the C scale, and then I went to a G major, which is the fifth in a C major scale. I hope this is making sense. You're basically going with the Roman numerals. So let's try this in another key. Let's say the key of E major. Now, since we're in the key of E major, guess who's number 1? E major. And that means that the second would be F sharp, and the third is G sharp, and the fourth is A major, and the fifth is B major. The sixth is going to be C sharp minor, and then the seventh is a D sharp diminished. So essentially, with this pattern, the major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, you can kind of locate all the chords that belong to that specific key. Now, this could be a little bit overwhelming here, trying to memorize all different types of formulas to know what notes of a scale and what notes to choose for a chord, and major, minor, minor, major, major. It sounds nuts. But I want to help you out with just 3 simple rules, 3 simple little guidelines that can help you in constructing chord progressions and eventually just writing music. And then from those 3 guidelines, you can be as creative as you want, experiment, and come up with your own ideas for chord progressions. So guideline number 1 would be, let's create musical phrases. You can't really write a story with just one long sentence. There has to be dynamics in there, right? There has to be commas and sentences and periods, and then eventually enough sentences turn into a paragraph, that enough paragraphs turn into a chapter. Same thing with music. Musical phrases are key. So let's write for a 4-bar progression. And what I mean by bar is 4 measures. And if we're writing in 4/4, meaning the time signature of the song has 4 beats per measure and every quarter note gets a beat, that means that we're going to have a chord progression for each of those 4 bars. Okay, so let's create a musical phrase and keep it even at 4 bars. And then guideline number 2 is when you're starting to write chord progressions, it would be helpful to always start with the 1 chord. So if you're in the key of C major, the 1 chord would be C major chord. And then the third guideline would be ending your musical phrase, maybe on bar 4, measure 4, ending with a 4 chord or a 5 chord. This will kind of help just seal the deal and end the musical phrase so that when you transition to another 4 bars or the next bar, it would be a lot more welcoming. And so if you're looping those 4 bars, going from a 4 or a 5 back to a 1 concludes the musical phrase. So let's put all this into action. All right, so let's hit the ground running here. So here we have our 4 measures, our 4 bars. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and each beat per measure, 1, 2, 3, 4 beats. So let's start with our C major chord for the first chord. And then our second chord. Now, since we're going to have the 4 or the 5 as our last chord, you could really choose any chord progression or any chords between those two. So let's start with the third. So we're going to go from the 1 to the 3. And then for the next one, let's try going to the second. And then let's go ahead and end with the 4. Let's see what that sounds like. So we're going to go from 1, 3, 2, to 4. So it's cool. It's a cool progression. What does it sound like if we change the 4 over to a 5? So let's see what that does. You get a little bit more of this. Yes, it is ending. This does feel like we're coming home now with the 5. So it's a little bit brighter. It's more uplifting. And that's why we kind of want to focus on having a 4 or 5 at the end there, because it just makes that transition back to 1 like, yes, this feels natural. It feels good. And so what's cool is you can go ahead and experiment and come up with the different patterns to see what sparks any creativity for you to even create melodies over. So let's try this again. Let's go to the second one here. And instead of the third, why don't we try a 6? So we'll go to the 6. And the second here will stay at the 2 and then end with the 5. Let's see what that does. Now, it's fine, it's good, but what mood does it extract? Like what does it cause? What vibe is it giving you? And that's really at the heart of what we're doing here with these chord progressions. It's kind of like unlocking this code to be like, oh, this combination does feel cool. It's really feeling good, and it's giving me some space to write a melody. This adds a little bit more tension when we went to the 6. And this kind of just brightens it up. It just goes up. So what if we went, let's say, instead of the 6, went to the 3, to the third again, 3, and then let's go to the 6 here and see what that does. So I like that because it's not so much, it's kind of similar with it. The third is a little bit similar, as you can see here, to the 1. The same 2 notes are there, the E and the G are there, but what's changing is instead of the C, we're going down to a B. So that's why they sound somewhat similar. And then we're seeing another shift. We're going back to the C here, and then we got the E stays there, but then we're shifting the A up here for this the 6. and then we come back to the B. And this is what makes it sound so good when we're going back to the 1, because we're going to resolve. We're saying, here's the B, and we're going to run right back to C. This is what we would call a leading tone, the B going into the C. Now this is where you can experiment with different inversions. So let's say at the C major, our 1, let's say, well, right now we're at root inversion. But what if we did first inversion? Meaning instead of the C at the bass or the root note, E would be at the root note, followed by G, and then C on the top. Cool. So you can see even just flipping the inversion opens it up a little bit more, gives you more room to add brand new life into that same chord progression that we had.